I have a challenge for you. The year is 1845. You're the commander of the last free army in India, the Khalsa of the Sikh Empire. Trained up to European standards and equipped with the best weapons on the continent, this is no force of undisciplined savages. Rather, it's quite possibly the finest army in the world. It's certainly superior to that of your British enemy. That isn't just speculation, because at your latest battle at Ferozeshah, the superior caliber and skill of your artillery totally wiped out the British battery. Your infantry performed even better, repulsing the assaults against your fortifications and forcing them into a disorderly retreat. Now the British are trapped in their camp, suffering from starvation, thirst, and exposure. The Khalsa awaits your orders. So, by now, you're probably asking, what's the challenge here? Well, I haven't told you your mission yet. Because your mission, dear viewer, is not to win this battle. Oh no. Your mission is to lose it, and to get as many of your own men killed as possible. So you can call me Ezekiel, and this is the First Anglo-Sikh War. But first, many of you will know that this channel got its start by teaching you how to play Victoria 2. That's why I'm proud to announce that this video was created in collaboration with Paradox Interactive to showcase to you the world of its sequel, Victoria 3, which you can play right now using the link in the pinned comment below this video. Rule any nation on Earth starting in the year 1836, including both the Sikh Empire and their British East India Company enemies. You can use the game's fully simulated economy to bring your nation into the industrial era, muster a massive army to expand your empire, and even realize your own political ideology in the game using its in-depth politics system. Don't mind those radicals, just look at Ancapistan go. And now, back to the video. So, how did such a high-quality European-style army form in Asia? Why was it fighting against the British? And most importantly, why were its own leaders trying to kill it? Well, funny story that. The Sikh Empire, naturally, was the empire of the Sikhs located in the Punjab region. There's a tremendous amount of history here. So in brief, after the collapse of the Mughal Empire, the native Sikh people of the Punjab formed a federation of independent princedoms, who warred with each other almost as much as with their foreign invaders. Then, at the turn of the 19th century, through a masterful campaign of diplomacy and war, they were united into the Sikh Empire by Ranjit Singh, with its capital in Lahore. Under his leadership, the Sikh Empire was a rapidly developing pluralistic society. This was remarkable since the Sikhs had, themselves, suffered generations of oppression at the hands of their former Muslim rulers. While all of this was going on, the British East India Company's conquest of India was in full swing, leaving the Sikh Empire as one of the few remaining free states in India. This showed Ranjit Singh the vast superiority of the European way of war. So to buy time, he signed a non-aggression pact with the British and spent the rest of his reign consolidating the Sikh state, and, with the help of foreign advisors, reforming its military, the Khalsa. The good times were not to last though. Ranjit Singh's death in 1839 was followed by a rapid deterioration of Sikh politics, allowing the Khalsa to consolidate power around itself. It even began experimenting with republican ideas, such as democratically electing its own officers and repeatedly murdering the empire's rulers to replace them with more malleable ones. The Khalsa used this newfound power to extract outrageous concessions from the government and to pillage their own countryside. Sikh leadership knew that this had to be stopped. But how? They didn't want to get murdered like their forebears. So if they couldn't break the Khalsa, perhaps someone else could. And perhaps that someone was the British. War with the East India Company seemed to be on the horizon anyway, so what if they started the war now and ordered their generals, who also wanted the Khalsa broken, to intentionally lose it? Well, that idea was so crazy that it just might work. And so, on the night of December 11th, 1845, the Khalsa crossed the river Sutlej, triggering the British to declare war, thus beginning the First Anglo-Sikh War. The two armies that crossed the Sutlej had a combined strength of 40,000 men. Each was led by Lal or Tej Singh, men party to the conspiracy to destroy the Khalsa. They even went as far as to remain in constant communication with their supposed British enemy. After their crossing, multiple important yet weakly defended British positions were in reach. So naturally, both commanders decided to stay put and wait for the British to come to them. The main British force in the region was a 10,000-man army led by Sir Hugh Gough, a British veteran of the Napoleonic Wars. Gough's first move was to quickly march towards the British garrison at Ferozeshah, but they were intercepted by a small Sikh force at Mudki. When Lal Singh heard that he was going up against an army of only 10,000 men, he was not happy. His much larger army would annihilate that, so he chose to send a small force from his army that he knew the British could beat. It's difficult to say how large this force was, but it was most likely between 2,000 and 3,500 soldiers. This absurd maneuver was the first major indicator to the Khalsa that their generals weren't being honest with them. The two armies arrayed themselves for battle in the jungles around the village of Mudki. When the artillery fire began, Lal Singh bravely ran away, destroying the army's chain of command. Then, instead of rejoining his main force, some sources claim that Lal spent the night even more bravely hiding in a bush. What an absolute legend. Eventually, the British sent their cavalry forward. They managed to drive the Sikh cavalry from the field, but their infantry was too disciplined and well covered by the jungle to break, so after taking a lot of casualties from musket fire, the mounted troops pulled back. It all came down to the infantry. As the British infantry approached, the Sikh guns became more effective, while the jungle forced both sides into close-range fighting. The heavily outnumbered Sikhs performed extremely well here, degrading the battle into a series of small, brutal skirmishes spread throughout the jungle. Neither side had any thought of surrender. Every soldier, including the Sikh gunners, fought to the death. The battle ended around midnight, with the Sikhs suffering an estimated 300 fatalities, while the British roll call showed that they had lost 215, with another 657 wounded. That was not a good sign for the British. In spite of having an overwhelming numerical advantage, they were unable to inflict many more casualties than they took themselves, and soon, they'd be the ones who were outnumbered. The British followed up this victory by marching to attack the Sikh army at Ferozeshah. Along the way, they were joined by other units until their army reached a combined strength of 18,000 men. The British found an oddly arrayed Sikh army at Ferozeshah. Lal did what he could to create the weakest position possible. He built 3 long rows of fortifications around the town, each one facing south, east, or west, with nothing guarding the northern approach. The artillery and infantry were evenly distributed along these lines, while the cavalry was sent away from the battlefield. This all meant that the 25,000 men who should have outnumbered the British were instead themselves slightly outnumbered by them. The British chose to concentrate their forces along the corner of the southern and eastern lines. The battle began with a barrage from the British guns, answered shortly after by the Sikh cannons. Here, the Sikh artillery proved itself superior to the British, ending the artillery duel by disabling or destroying every British gun. A major accomplishment. So once again, the British would have to fight using mostly infantry. The British left advanced first, but was decimated before reaching Sikh lines. However, the British right breached the Sikh fortifications and penetrated into their camp. Cavalry and infantry were sent in to exploit this gap, but they got bogged down by Sikh snipers hiding in the low doorways of their tents. Soon, they were driven back by a counterattack. The British were ordered to retreat, but many of their officers were killed, so it was very disorderly. The battle ended by nightfall, with the British badly beaten and preparing for the inevitable, fatal Sikh counterattack. But even if the Sikhs didn't kill them, hunger would. The British left all of their supplies back at Mudki, meaning that they had no food and no cold weather clothing. And, even worse, the only nearby wells were in the town of Ferozeshah itself. It had been 18 hours and one major battle since the British drank a single drop of water. British officers suggested retreating, but Gough said, and I quote, "Never. I'd rather die on the spot. I'll fight them tomorrow and beat them." This wasn't just a matter of pride. India was not a pacified colony. Any weakness from the British could inspire rebellions across the region. This wasn't just a disaster for the British, but for the Sikh leaders too, who, remember, are trying to lose the war. But the Khalsa was just too good for them. Lal Singh's new priority was to keep the British alive. After successfully restraining the army from advancing and annihilating the British, Lal went on to somehow convince them all to retreat. This enraged the men, who proceeded to ransack his tent. But, in spite of their anger, the Sikh army spent the night packing up their camp and then marching to the river Sutlej. The following morning, the British made their final suicidal advance against Ferozeshah, but they reached the Sikh fortifications with no resistance. When they wandered into the camp, all they found were sabotaged wells, mines, and a small rear guard that they quickly dealt with. But then, just as it looked like the British were going to snap victory from the jaws of defeat, defeat gave them a nasty bite. On the horizon, the army of Tej Singh was approaching. The not at all recovered British soldiers were forced to once again array themselves for battle. At 2 p.m., Tej Singh's army got within artillery range and began their barrage. The British barely had any guns with which to return fire. But then, Incredibly, the Sikh barrage ended, and the entire army of Tej Singh packed up their things and walked away. They even left their camp behind. Neither side could believe it. Everyone thought Tej Singh had been bribed. And so, the Battle of Ferozeshah ended in an unbelievable British victory. When the British looted Tej's camp, they found it full of valuable loot, supplies, cannons, and deadly mines. Leaving the cannons behind was particularly bad for the Sikhs because artillery was one of their main strengths. This loss would be truly felt in the next and final battle of the war, Sabreon. After abandoning 2 whole camps to the British, the Khalsa started to run out of supplies. This made the Lahore government very happy, and they successfully stalled any relief attempts. The moment to break the Khalsa was fast approaching. The Sikhs took up defensive positions near the town of Sabreon on either side of the Sutlej River. Only a single pontoon bridge connected the 2 halves of the army. Dividing the army like this maximized the chances of its destruction, but it was also an act of sabotage so overt that the Sikh soldiers physically manhandled Lal Singh across the bridge to the dangerous south with them. They also started entering his tent to berate him whenever they felt like it. One soldier is quoted as saying, "You destroy a whole army, which, whatever its faults and crimes may have been, has always been ready to obey the orders of the state and its officers. We might even now punish you as you deserve, but we will leave you to answer to your guru and your God, while we, deserted and betrayed as we are, will do what we can to preserve the independence of our country." Meanwhile, Tej Singh wasted valuable time ordering the construction of a tower of astrological significance to him. On the day of the battle, the British had 20,000 men. This was almost half of the Khalsa's combined 35,000, but due to their split deployment, the British were, in practice, only fighting a little less than 20,000 Sikhs. On the 10th of February, 1846, at 7 a.m., the British artillery opened fire. The Sikhs' weaker battery gave a poor response due to its bad position and the discovery that their ammunition had been sabotaged by the government. At 9 a.m., the British left attacked, successfully forcing the Sikhs off of their fortifications. Shortly after that, the British center and right did the same. The whole Sikh army south of the river was forced to retreat towards the pontoon bridge, but they would find no salvation there, because Tej Singh had already sabotaged it, after fleeing across himself, of course. It was here when the battle ended, and the slaughter began. The British were methodical, avoiding hand-to-hand combat and firing disciplined volleys at the retreating Sikhs. Then, between the sabotage by Tej Singh, the weight of the men trying to cross, and the fire from the British horse artillery, the bridge finally collapsed. Some Sikhs attempted to swim, while others chose to die fighting. The British spared no one. They couldn't have if they tried. The men of the Khalsa insisted on fighting to the end. The battle was over by 11 a.m. The British suffered 2,383 casualties, of whom 320 were fatalities. The survivors looted the Sikh camp, while all around them were the corpses of nearly 10,000 Sikh dead. The Sikh leaders finally got what they wanted. They lost the war. I've heard it said that it's more dangerous to fight an army of 1,000 sheep led by a lion than 1,000 lions led by a sheep. Well, in the First Anglo-Sikh War, that's exactly what happened. The Khalsa was led right into the slaughter. The Sikh Empire still had 20,000 soldiers available, but their leaders were satisfied with the outcome and cut them off from what few supplies they were still getting. The British then went on to occupy Lahore. The peace treaty they signed further crippled the Sikh military, extracted major land concessions from the state, and banned the Sikhs from employing Europeans in any capacity. It also gave the British the right to pass through the Punjab whenever they wanted. The traitorous leaders of the Sikh army had mixed fortunes after the war. Most were publicly rewarded by the British, but the British didn't really trust them, and so slowly took away their privileges. Meanwhile, the people of the Punjab, in spite of this humiliation, didn't feel truly defeated. They believed that they were bested by treachery, not force, so it followed that if they could fight a real campaign against the British, then they would win. An opportunity which would present itself in the Second Anglo-Sikh War. But by then, it was way too late. That war ended in another British victory. And that's the First Anglo-Sikh War. This video was funded by the board of the Honorable East India Company, with money made from conquering the Sikh Empire, including French bread and Josiah, as well as by Paradox Interactive and their newest game, Victoria 3. Links in the pinned comment. Enjoy.